Funding for this program was provided in part by the RE Synergy Foundation. Content for the Sustainable World.
My dad was an old-school surgeon who always wished he was a rancher, and a man who took life by the horns and ran with it. Think John Wayne meets Ernest Hemingway meets Teddy Roosevelt. One thing that always embarrassed me, though, was that if my dad saw something interesting wherever he was, he'd go ask about it. He'd start up impromptu conversations with perfect strangers about crop rotation, cattle genetics, or how to get all those pieces of firewood in the load to stay on top of that one little donkey. I was mortified as a kid. Well, I grew up, and now that's me. I married a perfect man with itchy feet who loves all things music and film and who makes documentaries just for the love of it. If you dump all of those things into a petri dish and let them stew for 25 years of blissful chaos, what do you get? Well, welcome to my life of vicarious agriculture. Come on along for the ride. So there we are.
Yeah.
So there we are. Okay, so now we've been chatting with you for days, and now I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, if you would.
Okay, yeah, I'm James Metcalfe from Derbyshire in England. I'm over here in Escanaba, even in Michigan for the North American Hill Sheep Show. I am like a fish out of water. I'm completely out of my comfort zone, but I've just decided to come over here, throw myself into it, whatever sort of comes my way, and so far, so good, really enjoying it.
But you say you're a fish out of water, but this is kind of your thing a little bit, because you're being asked to judge over here. And you do that.
I do that, yeah. Judging is something I do back in the UK. Whether I do it well or badly, that's up to the people that I've judged in the past. I was always sort of told by like my granddad and things like that, there's only two people happy at the end of a sheep show, and it's the judge and the person who's won. Everybody else isn't happy at all. So I'm a fish out of water in America. Maybe not so much in the sense of what I'm doing over here, but this is very, very different. Very, very different to my normal thing, my normal life. But here we go. Let's go for it and see what happens.
Well, so I'm going to go into that in a minute, but I do want to. This is a first time. The North American Hill Sheep Show is the first time event that the lovely Pell's Pie people are putting on, and it's a really ambitious thing because hill sheep are something that are very common in Britain, but not here. Tell me a little bit about hill sheep.
In Britain?
Yes.
Yeah, so hill sheep are the backbone of our farming system, or sheep farming system. We run what's called a stratified sheep farming system. So basically, to put it simply, sheep trickle downhill. So we have our hill breeds, which are kept pure, run on the tops of the mountains, on the moors in England, generally sort of 1,200 feet and going up, in parts of Wales up to 3,000 feet, in parts of Scotland up to 3,000 feet. You take them further down the hill. They're then crossed with what we call maternal sires, such as Blueface Leicesters, which is the main one, Teeswaters, to make a hybrid ewe, which is then moved further down the hill onto the lowland farms. They're then crossed with our terminal sires, our Suffolk Texels. I'm trying to use the breeds that are more common here in America, but we also have Charolais, things like that we cross onto our hybrid hill sheep, generally mules or half-breds, and then they produce the fat lambs further down the system. So the whole of the UK sheep farming system, whether you're on a hill 2,000 feet above sea level or you're 200 feet above sea level on a good lowland grass farm, is all working together as one national flock, basically. You might have thousands and thousands of different farmers, but we're all working together in one thing, and the base of that thing is our hill sheep, which are hardy, good mothers. And that is the sort of basis of our sheep, is a hard-working, good mother. And then that will trickle its way all the way down into our sheep system.
But this happens over time, right? So this is to extend the productive life of sheep, right?
Yeah. So they will probably do the first 3, maybe 4 years on the top of the hill. After that, it becomes hard work for a sheep. It's not good going up there. They will do well as a young sheep. Right? When they're young, they're fit, plenty of energy. So you bring them a bit further down the hill, which will extend their productive life. I mean, we all know ultimately what happens to all farmed animals at the end. That, you know, if they end up in the food chain, whether they are here for a long time or a short time, that's where they go. So we don't want them here for too short a time. So you can have a ewe on the hill for maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years, but you might get 3, 4, 5, 6 years of it further down on some slightly better ground. Then obviously you use that. It's the female lambs that are sold that then go down to the lowland farms. They will also have that 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 years of productive life down on a lowland farm as well. So yeah, extending the, I don't want to say the usability because that sounds like we're using the animals, which
you kind of are.
We are kind of using them, but we're not. We're looking after them and caring for them, and using the word used seems the wrong terminology for it, because it just makes them look like a commodity, which I suppose ultimately they are a commodity, but they're not a commodity. Not to a farmer, they're not a commodity. They're part of their extended family to a certain extent. I know we eat them at the end of it, and we don't eat short of that family, but yeah.
Yeah, but really, your goal as a farmer is to keep. It's the same as in business. You want to keep the productive life of what you're growing as long as possible. So you're going to treat them well, but you're going to realize there's a limitation, right?
There is a limitation to everything. Yeah, there is a limitation to everything. It comes to a point when, you know, that sheep is no longer viable to be a profitable animal, and you do the right thing, and that enters the food chain as well.
So we went to the Hexham Mart and we got to see the auction, beautiful auction yard. Yeah. And we saw the sheep that they had them run around a circle, and you buy them in batches. They had little flocks of, you know, anywhere between 10 and 20 as was the average. So is this the type of thing that farmers do when they're ready to move them downhill? They bring them to the auction and then they find a new home, or how does that work?
The majority of it will be sold through auctions, but you know, we're in 2024 now. There's online platforms in the UK. We've got one called Sell My Livestock, where you can advertise with pictures and videos of your stock, prices that you want, where you are. So you can contact buyers from, you know, a wider area, because at the end of the day, an auction market will advertise what stock they've got. They will advertise the sale well in advance. They will get catalogues, brochures out to farmers up and down the country that they know are interested in coming as well. But it's still a limited audience as to what's there on the day. But as a buyer as well, you will go and seek out what you want. But obviously we've got social media now as well. You know, I do quite a bit of selling or advertising via Facebook. I'm the wrong sort of side of 45 now to really do Instagram and Snapchat and things like that. So Facebook is kind of the one that I do use, and I've got children, so I suppose they could teach me how to use these other social media apps, but a lot of farmers are my age anyway, so they also don't know how to use these things. But yeah, the auction mart is generally for breeding stock. I would say when more than 90% of the breeding stock ends up going through. In the UK, it's a very short selling season as well. We call it silly season. So it starts about the last couple of days of August, and it's pretty much all over and done by the end of the first week of October. There's an odd sale will run a little bit later into October, but yeah, not many. I would think 90-95% of the sheep sales are concentrated in about a 5 to 6 week period, and it is ridiculous time on farm, because you're either at a sheep sale, going to a sheep sale, coming back from a sheep sale, sorting out what you bought, or preparing what you're about to sell. And it is completely crazy for that sort of 5-6 weeks. And the silly old me's picked 10 days of that to be over here in America. So I've had to pick and choose how I've sold and sorted sheep this time.
So it's not just the fact that you're willing to come over here, but you're actually doing it during that time, which is...
I would say, other than lambing time, which obviously that is just an intense 24-hour day period of the farming calendar, this is probably the busiest time. So yeah, we've had to be a little bit selective this year. I've done a little bit of private selling, private buying early on to get that out of the way, and then everything's just gone on hold for the next 10 days. And then when I get back, it's sort of going to be a case of I'm not going to be able to get over the jet lag. I'm going to have to just hit the ground running and pick back up. And yeah, it is a shame. I'm a bit sort of gutted. I have missed 1 or 2 of the sales that I really do like to go to, but you know, at the end of the day, you don't get to come over here every year. So I'm going to embrace this experience and we can go to them sheep sales again next year when they come round.
Yeah, you can always tell the people that are truly ag people because you've come over here and you're obviously we're in it, staying in a lovely B&B.
Yeah.
But the first thing you do is go out and look at the sheep. Right?
That was pretty much the first thing I did. I heard some barring. I was like, right, where are they? And we do that everywhere we go. Everywhere I go, I'm on a mission to find some sheep. I mean, if we do ever get the chance to have a holiday, which is very rare, we probably end up on one of the small Spanish islands, and they don't have sheep, but I will find some somewhere.
That's what I heard, that you have a tendency to find them no matter where you are.
I'll sit there on the coach looking out the window looking for sheep.
But one of the reasons that you are asked to do judging is because you cut your way around a farm. Tell me about your farm and name of it and where it is.
So we're Hardenclough Farm. We're in a little village called Edale, which is in the heart of the Peak District in Derbyshire. We are right at the southern tip of the Pennines. We're not actually on the Pennines. So the Pennine Hills come all the way down into Derbyshire and they stop in the valley of Edale, and we are on the opposite side. So we look across at the start of the Pennine Way. That's the Pennines are about 260, 70 miles. They stretch from Derbyshire just up and a little bit over the border into Scotland. It's a very harsh farm where we are, so we're north facing. The whole farm faces north. We're on a very steep bank, so during the winter we don't get any direct sunlight onto the farm at all. It starts probably in about the next couple of weeks. You'll see little patches of the hill go into shade, and they won't come back out of shade until they'll be the last things to come back out of shade, which will be sort of March time next year. And then slowly, as the days shorten, that shadow creeps further and further and further down the farm until we get to probably about 10 days before the shortest day, and the whole farm is in shade. And it stays in that until around 10, 11 days after the shortest day, and then you slowly watch the shadow creep back up the hill until we get to sort of around just after the equinox again, and we're back into sunshine again.
But the weather is not the only thing that's requires a little fortitude. Tell me about the ground.
It's so we're on 6 inches of topsoil, and then below that it is just very, very heavy clay. So one of the sort of things, if you're ever having a conversation with a farmer that you've never met before in England, they'll sort of say, oh, does your farm suit a wet time or a dry time? Ours suits neither. We get wet very quickly and we get dry very quickly as well, because we're just on that very, very small amount of topsoil. So we've had extremes of weather the last couple of years at home, which I know everybody across the world is experiencing now. 2018, we had a horrendous drought. We because we're north facing and our grass starts later, the grass had never started growing before we got a drought, and it didn't break until I think it was about the 1st of August that year. So our grass never grew until into the first week of August 2018. 2022 we had another drought which lasted well into July, so again a bad year. And then 2023 we had another drought at the start of the year, and it started raining at the end of June, and it never stopped raining until the end of June this year. So we pretty much had 12 months with about 10 dry days. So it's a challenge, but there's not a lot you can do about it. You can't control the weather, so you just have to get up and get on and deal with it, really.
But it's not when we were in England last year, one of the things that impressed me was that these are a lot of these places are small holdings.
Yeah.
And so it's not like you're going to have fields and fields where you can go buy trucks of hay, right?
No.
Consistently, which is an issue.
Yeah.
I would think, especially as you have the vagaries of climate.
Yeah, generally when one of us suffers, we all suffer. But it is, whilst obviously we're here in the US and the size difference in the country is vast. I mean, we're here in Michigan, and the UK would pretty much fit inside Michigan, just to give you sort of some idea of the scale of the size of the country. But we still do have quite a lot of climatic diversity. So, you know, if the middle of the UK, which is what the very south of Scotland, middle and north of England, is having a bad time, the north of Scotland will probably be having a better time, and the south of England will be, and vice versa. So you can pretty much split it up to the point. And we are, you know, the farming community are a group of people that will help each other out. So if there's hay shortages in the south, there'll be stuff taken down from the north, and vice versa. farmers are just a resilient bunch of people. If there's a problem, you'll get around it. However expensive it is and however hard it is to do, you will ultimately get around it at some point. Like last year when we had all the wet weather, we got a really dry week in September. There were people cutting grass left, right and centre and making hay in the middle of September. It's a very rare thing to do. When I left home last week, we were having an unseasonal warm spell as well, and people were cutting grass again in the middle of September because they thought, well, stocks have got down over the last few years. A lot of people carry some through if they can do, and yeah, there was grass falling down all over the place where people think we'll just grab it now while we can. So yeah, so you get there.
Yeah. So now one of the things that I always have a hard time with is remembering, okay, the Peak District, the Lake District, Northumberland, what is the shape of the thing?
Yeah.
And tell me about the pregnant rabbit and where you are in the pregnant
Yes,
rabbit.
so that's how I was describing the easiest way to work out the UK. If you imagine the UK facing west, with Ireland on the west of it, looks a little bit like a pregnant bunny rabbit because you've got the feet sticking out at the bottom, which
and
is...
he's running east. He is running west?
He's running west towards Ireland, yeah. So the fluffy tail is sort of Norfolk, East Anglia, things like that. And then the feet, which are on the bottom, the south coast, sort of...
Exeter, so
Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, going through Hampshire and everything like that to Kent. And then Wales is obviously the pregnant bit. And then the bunny ears and everything is the Highlands of Scotland. So that's how I'd always remembered it as a kid, that the UK was basically a rabbit and Scotland was the head and the south coast was the feet.
And you were at the heart?
We are literally at the heart, yeah. That's
okay.
The heart of the UK, yeah.
Okay, and so Hadrian's Wall would be kind of like the neck, right?
Yes, so, basically, if it was wearing a collar.
If he's wearing a collar, okay.
Wall,
so
yeah.
I have to say, I was thinking seahorse, but the pregnant rabbit kind of does work out. Right now, there's one of the things that the Peak District in general, or that the between that region, there's quite a bit of these small farmlands that most of us might get from James Herriot.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So you've got all the small farms up in the Yorkshire Dales, which is geographically from me is sort of 60, 70 miles north in a straight line. The way that the UK roads work, they're not like the US roads. It's not a straight line up there. You go all around the house like a bit of spaghetti, really. So what might be 60 miles north is probably 120, 130 miles on the road of driving around lots of little bends and getting stuck behind tractors and things like that.
Yes, and having to back up while the hay comes the other direction, right?
But we are a nation of relatively small farms. The bigger farms tend to be the arable farms, sort of in the Lincolnshire area, Leicestershire, Cambridge area. They tend to be bigger, 3,000-4,000 acre enterprises. Some of the farms with big open areas of what we call moorland, which is the high peat, heather hills. They can be quite big farms as well. But a lot of the farms are 300 to 400 acres, that sort of size, and smaller as well. So we've got a large number of farmers with what appears to be quite a quiet voice, really. We don't seem to come across, not like the French. I think they're fantastic. French farmers, I admire the way that if the French government upsets French farmers, they just shut France down completely.
Running the tractors into the city.
I wish that British farmers had the gall to do exactly the same, but they'll just block Paris and block all the ports just like that, and I think that's absolutely superb. Yeah, the French.
You'll have to organise that.
There was talk of it about 12 months ago, and I just knew it was never going to happen. It just wouldn't happen in this country at all. France has a similar sized population to the UK, but a lot bigger area, and a lot of it is more of a rural voice, whereas in the UK it's the big cities that make up the majority of the population, and so they have the majority of the voice, and obviously the government isn't interested in the rural vote because it's fairly irrelevant to the bigger picture.
So, but in a way, I mentioned to you earlier that it's funny, you can't, this is where the tourists go. They come to see the little sheep and the dotting the farms. So can you explain how the farming system works and tenant farms work in England?
Tenant farms. So we have a mixture of owned farms, family farms, and tenanted farms. There are several organisations that own the tenanted farms. There's the Crown Estate, owns quite a lot of tenanted farms. The National Trust, which is a charity, a conservation charity that deal with conservation, and they also look after some of the stately homes. Quite a lot of the water companies own farms as well, usually around their catchment areas to their reservoirs and things like that. Some of the utility companies own it. The Duchy of Lancaster owns farms, which is again part of the Crown Estate, but a slightly different subsidiary of it. Then there's obviously quite a lot of the big old sort of estates that belong to people like the Duke of Northumberland and people like that. They've got tenanted farms. Tenancies have changed over the years. When my granddad first took on the tenancy of our farm in 1971, I think, if I'm right, he took on what was called it was a 3-generational tenancy. So that would cover him, my dad and myself, but it could skip a generation. So if my granddad and my dad wasn't interested and it went to me, we would still have another generation to come after that. They changed it in, I think it was 1986, the way that tenancies work, and everyone was gifted lifetime tenancies. So you would go into a farm and you were guaranteed to be that tenant as long as you lived, which there's still quite a lot of people around on those tenancies. Still quite a lot of people are on the 3-generation tenancy. Some of them are very lucky still to be on the 2nd. I think most people these days will be on the 3rd generation by now. And then that's all changed again more recently, and now what they grant is what's called a farm business tenancy, and they are varying lengths, anything from 2 years to 25 years. Most people generally these days tend to get a 5 or a 10-year tenancy, and then some people get the option to extend. So it all down to the individual landlords.
But what happens after that? Once you're to the end of your tenancy, it just goes up for grabs?
That's it. It comes back up for tender again, unless, people will enter negotiations. If the landlord's happy with what you're doing with their farm, they're not going to go through the whole rigmarole of. It's very expensive to advertise. Then they have to have viewing days, interview days, tender days, and everything like that. So if they've got a tenant in there that is looking after the farm, keeping it tidy, working to their objectives, because all landlords are different. I obviously tenant from a conservation charity, so they're very conservation minded. And if I was, I'm not saying abusing the farm, but they don't want a tenant that's there, ploughing everything up, reseeding everything, cutting down trees, making fields bigger, using lots of chemical fertilisers and things like that. If I was that kind of tenant and I came to the end of my time, I would be pretty sure they would be looking for a different tenant to come in. Whereas I hope I'm ticking all my landlord's boxes, and I'm all right, I'm securing my tenancy. I have a friend that's just taken on another National Trust farm. He's trying to do exactly the same. He's got a 10-year tenancy, but I'm sure if he just fulfills their objectives, he will get to carry on his tenancy as well. It is nerve-wracking as a tenant, because you never know how things are going to change in the political landscape and the legal way that these things work, and things could become unsecure in the future. But at the minute, everything's fine, and I don't want to think about that side of it really. Just carry on doing what I'm doing, and I think that's a farmer thing, though. You do what you do, and when a problem arises, you then cross that bridge when it does arise. And there's no point putting up bridges that aren't there, and you just have to wait until you get to that bridge.
Yeah, no, one thing that is very interesting to me is the word conservation in connection with farming, because many people assume that if you are into land conservation, of course you're not going to farm on it, you're going to let squirrels run around on it and that's it. But that's not the case. In my opinion, the word stewardship is more integral to that. So tell me about the difference to you between conservation of a land that's basically been in agricultural production for
If you don't look after the land that you're farming, it won't look after you. I think it's as simple as that. We like to farm alongside nature. I don't want to just sit there and, in my ideal head scenario, yes, just sit there and see a load of sheep. But that's not what I want to see. My farm is, in my mind, it's beautiful. It's an absolute thing of beauty that my granddad and my dad have helped create over the last 50 odd years. and I want to keep that going forward. It's beautiful to see the hedgerows out in flower. It's beautiful to see trees that my favourite tree on the farm is a little tree that was growing on top of a gatepost, and it obviously was never going to live on there. But I pulled this little tiny thing out about 16 or 17 years ago and just planted it on the side of one of the tracks that goes up the farm, and it's now about 25 feet high, and it's a beautiful little thing. And every time I walk past it I think that just one tiny little thing of taking a little tiny sapling out of the top of a rotting gatepost and popping it in the thing. And we've got roe deer back on the farm, which we've not seen. I can't remember seeing roe deer in my lifetime, but they reappeared, a pair of them, during COVID when it was quiet, and they've got used to me being about. They used to just run a mile and I'd very rarely see them, but now they know if I'm going past on the quad bike, they'll take a look up and then let me carry on. And if I stop on the quad bike, they will carry on what they're doing as long as I don't stay too long. But it's beautiful to see. And it's only a little small herd of 7, and they're not causing, I mean, if there's 77, then that might be a few too many. But yeah, it's lovely to see everything that's about, and badgers and foxes, as long as the foxes don't get too close to the hen house, it's not an issue. But that's what you're a custodian of the farm, and you've got to hand it going forward in good heart. And as long as you can do the two things together, and it's not difficult to do the two things together at all. And I think there's a bad public perception of farmers that we are just these monoculture demons that just plough everything up and rip everything up. And it's not the case in 90% of farms at all. We are looking after things. Healthy wildlife, healthy farm, you get healthy soils, and it's all about, there's got to be a balance. There's got to be a balance.
Now, I also think that that farming, though, has gone through quite a bit of transition, and you are subject to the vagaries of political whim.
Yep.
And though I am a conservationist, I will say sometimes with the best of intentions, conservation does really weird things.
Yeah.
And as my understanding, last year I heard from a great number of people that trees are going up all over in Britain. And tell me how that's impacted farmland.
So I'm all for a few more trees in the right places, and I don't think we've any problem as farmers in doing that. We can all find unproductive bits of the farm that would quite happily, we could put some more trees on. I don't think any of us have got an issue with that at all. The science behind it, now all the science has been done about carbon sequestration in trees. However, the science hasn't been done about the carbon sequestration in the grassland that it's replacing. So until we've done that properly, then I don't think we can really sit and discuss putting lots and lots of trees in, because we might put all these trees in and then go, oh, hang on a minute, the grass that was there in the first place, because that takes carbon out of the atmosphere. I don't know at the moment whether it's better or worse than trees, but until we know the science behind that, we can't really sort of have this argument with government and things like that. But yeah, we've got more trees on the planet, I believe, now than we've had ever before, because of the amount that have been going in recently. And yeah, I don't know why councils aren't planting fruit trees in roundabouts and things like that, and providing food for people's in towns and trees at the same time. You know, all these trees that they put down streets and things like that should all be apple trees and pear trees and things like that. Feed the poor.
Yeah. But we all, and I'm a tree girl, so I'm one of those that thinks this is a cathedral when you're in a forest. But I also think that there are other places outside of the norm that we would think the peat bogs are supposed to store an incredible amount of carbon.
Yeah.
Things of that nature. And there are some studies out there that are saying that small ruminants do quite a bit less damage to the ground, and that they're actually able to convert carbon in a successful manner.
Well, like for example, my sheep, they soak carbon up with the wool. And one of the things I think when agriculture and emissions get tied up is the difference between, now I know methane's a greenhouse gas and carbon is a greenhouse gas. Now the carbon cycle is a very long cycle. For carbon to go up into the atmosphere, break down and come back down again, you're talking thousands of years. Methane is about a 12-year cycle. So that methane that a cow burps or farts or whatever it does goes up into the atmosphere. Within 12 years, it's back down feeding the grass again. Now, my sheep don't probably live as long as 12 years. An odd one will go past that age, but most of my cows will live to about 18 or 20 years. So they will be consuming their own methane back again before the end of their lifetime. So it's one of those sort of facts that gets passed by quite a lot when talking about emissions. And as an industry, I don't know what the figures are in the US, but in the UK we're quite low down. If there was that much, why don't they ban airplane flights? Why don't they get rid of cars, things like that? Nobody ever died from not going on holiday, but people do die from not eating food. And we've got to get our priorities straight when it comes to the climate and how we deal with it.
So I'm glad you talked about priorities, though, because British farmers,
Yeah.
specifically those that have invested their lives and their families generationally in sheep, there is this thing where you have to figure out which is most important to you. Do I stay as I have been forever, or do I adjust with the times? And the times in the last, well, you tell me how long, have gone from wool being synonymous with Britain to something very different now. Tell me a little bit about that.
Wool's a waste product. It is a waste product in our country. It doesn't cover the cost of actually removing it from the sheep. Sort of on your bigger farms, the sheep shearers come in, £1.50 a sheep to shear them. You get 1.5 kilos of wool. Last year I was getting 42 pence a kilo for my North Country Cheviot wool, and the black wool was worth 20 pence a kilo. So it was a byproduct to me. Current outlets in the UK, there's some Irish companies have come in to buy wool, and then we've got the British Wool Board, which in my opinion doesn't work anymore. It's a company where they basically take in all the wool and sell it, and then divide up the money that has been generated between all the farmers. So everybody who sends in a certain grade of wool will get an equal share of that. But they're a very top heavy company. They've got a CEO, several board members, grading staff, everything like that. Whereas the company that I deal with, well, I don't know what they have as a setup really, but I do know when I take my wool, I will get it weighed on the day and I'll get it paid in the same month. Whereas with the wool board, I get so much of an expected value, and then the rest of it is received 12 months later.
12 months? I mean, you're...
12 months later. The sheep shearers get paid the day that they come sheep shearing, but the wool check doesn't come in for another 12 months. In fact, it can be longer than that, because you generally, because we shear in the summer and we're busy making hay and things like that, the wool sits in the shed probably till September, when you've got a little bit of time. Well, you haven't got time in September. A lot of people will still be sat there in November because they're waiting for the rams to go in with the ewes and think, well, we've got 3 weeks now where we basically can't do anything, so we'll get rid of the wool now. And then it's sort of January before the first check comes, and it's 18 months after the sheep have been sheared that you actually get the balance of your wool. So, as I say, it's a byproduct now of the meat industry.
But this didn't used to be this way,
No, it was
right?
the other way around. So when my granddad was farming actively, when he first started farming, he'd pay the rent and all the bills for the year with the wool check. Now, as I say, I took in 1.7 tonnes of wool, and I come away with about £800 this year, something like that. In fact, I think it was less. I think it was £800 by the time I'd had my VAT added on the top. So I don't know if that's an American thing, but we get 20% of quite a lot of things, value-added tax basically stuck on the top. So.
Sales tax is what we have, yeah. But not 20% in most cases.
Ours is 20%. It was always 17.5%, and now it's gone up to 20%.
Well, I'm really hoping that everybody from Britain enjoys themselves, and if nothing else, there's a tea tent.
Exactly.
And a beer tent.
I think the beer tent will be more popular than the tea tent,
so
if I'm honest with you. Yeah.
Well, I so much appreciate. We're gonna speak with you again.
Yeah.
At the event itself, and you're going to be judging. Tell me what you're going to be judging.
I'm judging North Country Cheviots, and I'm judging Border Cheviots.
Okay.
So I'd say I'm looking forward to it. I hope everyone appreciates my judgment. I will be, which is unusual in the UK. I don't normally discuss my reasons with many people. It's all very quiet, it's in my head. In fact, I've always thought I'd love a penny for the thoughts of what's going on in the judge's mind when you're judging, because anybody who's done it will know that you are weighing up a million different things all at once and trying just to put half a dozen or a dozen sheep into an order when it's sort of you can find something wrong with most things if you look hard enough. You can always it depends how hard you're willing to look, but you will find a fault somewhere in everything. And then it's like weighing up and balancing those faults against each other. And one might have two faults, but one might have one fault that makes it worse than the two faults that the other one's getting. And you think, but yeah, I will always go and have a chat with the people who've shown afterwards and just explain why I came up to something, but I'll not sort of give a full overview of everything, but I'm quite happy to do that here and sort of say, you might not want to get inside my mind, but I'm quite happy to do that. So I say, anybody who wants to come up and just learn about what I do, and I've come all this way, so you might as well get your money's worth out of me while I'm here.
I think we will. Well, thank you so much.
No problem at all.